I am Paul Stanley, and I've been associated with the Phoenix Cinema in East Finchley for over 35 years. It's an art house cinema. It's one of the oldest in the country. I don't think the oldest. I got into archiving, which was accidental, really. Smiths Industries, who I was working for, closed down their film unit. And there was an accumulation of 30 years of work. And I was told to throw it away. And I hadn't got the heart to do that because there was some pioneering material on aviation and aerospace work that they'd done and other things. Rather than chuck it all away, I did something very naughty. I went to another very senior executive who I knew, who thought the way I did, and I said, look, can we not do this? And he said, well, what do you suggest? And I said, well, we find a home for it, and Huntley Film Archive seems the most convenient. And he looked at me and just said, well, you better get on with it. And I looked at him, I said, thanks, John. And I said, I suppose I didn't see your lips move, did I? And he said, no, you didn't. And for a succession of lunch hours, we heaved film in carrier bags down the Northern Line to Islington, where John Huntley's archive was then. Having started doing that, I couldn't stop.
We need to preserve increasing quantities of the total amount of moving image that's been found, because almost everything that was shot in the past is decaying. They're decaying in different ways at different rates, but if we don't do any restoration, if we don't halt the process of decay, actually a great deal of material that was shot over the last 120 years will simply disappear. So it's becoming a pressing issue, and of course the volume of material that needs to be restored is ever growing.
We went through this sort of history, this learning curve of grain reducing, and grain's probably one of the most charismatic features of film. It's the thing that, you know, on a static scene on film you can see movement, and typically that movement is a function of the grain that's inherent within the film. So to remove something that's so significant to the format is probably sacrilegious. What's happened now as the digital technology's improved and our compression tools have improved, we've started to relax a little bit more on those things so that the true nature of film can be conveyed as much as possible. And the things that probably we concentrate on removing are things like dirt and sparkle and scratches, which are really the unwanted artefacts of film being used extensively.
Colour is fading, distorting really badly, and rescuing that film and returning it to something like it was meant to be is really quite a challenge.
Yeah, so the whole point with what we do with restoration here is to make it look as good as it was the day it was shot. So we're not trying to make it look as if it's brand new and shot today. That's not, we kind of want it to look as its time. So there's different processes we can do. There's automated processes as well as manual processes when it comes to restoration. So you can stabilise the picture, so you can literally kind of put pins in the four corners of the image and stabilise it to stop the movement, which instantly makes something far more watchable.
And it's really having an eye on the aesthetics of the film and taking into consideration whether or not that was something that was part of the look of the film, for it to be handheld and urgent and their activity around what was going on, compared to whether it should have been a locked off shot with heads and shoulders where actually that movement is a distraction rather than something that's wanted. So, you know, it's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to make restoration an automated process, because it really requires some human intervention to actually look at the pictures in context and work out how to get the best out of them. And sometimes that will require the guidance of the client, and particularly if the client's still around who made the film in the first place, you know, they're probably the best person to direct as to how they want their programme to look.
A few years ago, we made digital masters of Ken Russell's film Women in Love, and that's late 60s, 69. We were able to work, very exciting, we were able to bring the cinematographer in, Billy Williams, to work on the grade, on the colour grade of the film. So that's fantastic. You have the person who shot the film. But what I thought was equally interesting was he wasn't going to rely just on memory. He had a Technicolor dye transfer print of the film that he donated to the archive not long before, alongside him in the grading theatre. So we had that over a light box so that for every shot we could refer to that as well.
Amazingly, we're still making film prints. It's in very, very small volumes. If you were to go back 6 or 7 years ago, film was at its peak for film distribution. So that was 35mm prints that would go out to the cinemas worldwide. On a big studio release, they might make 20,000 prints to go out into distribution across the world. Typically, that's migrated completely to digital now. The advantages of digital distribution and being able to copy files to replicate them to distribute makes it much, much easier. And unfortunately, it's probably something that's unavoidably gone, is that ability to show film in the cinema on celluloid on a large scale.
The fact that the majority of screenings now, broadly speaking, are from digital cinema packages, DCPs, has had a big impact on film history.
When it comes to reliability, one has to say that film does have a higher reliability level than digital. Whenever you get into anything electronic, you come up against all the quirks of electronic. I mean, you know full well with a personal computer, you'll suddenly find it'll glitch, it'll pause, and as I say, the Microsoft catchphrase will appear, program not responding.
It doesn't mean to say that digital is a bad way of preserving. It just requires a very different approach. For film, we know that the original physical material will potentially remain. For digital, we assume that the original physical material will not remain, and indeed it's the data that you need to preserve.
Well, this is a 1938 vintage projection room. That's the point where the cinema was turned round and this projection room is established. What I'm doing is taking a roll of 35mm off the plastic core that it's arrived on and putting it on a spool to put on the projector for screening. It is in fact a roll of advertising from Pearl and Dean, who happen to be one of the iconic names of cinema, with one of the most iconic jingles. Now, film always arrived in a cinema on a core, and this was one of the projectionist chores to actually get it off the core onto a spool for screening. In the early days, you screened each reel one at a time on one of two projectors, and you did a switch over between them. That all changed a few years ago, and towers, there's one alongside me here, were installed, which enabled you to put all the film together on one enormous 4,000-metre reel, splice it all together.
Some of the real film advocates, Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg, will have a demand for wanting to be able to see their films shown on print, albeit on a limited scale. So Christopher Nolan for Dunkirk did an extensive 70mm release for that film and made over 50 prints, and actually had 70mm projectors reinstated in lots of cinemas to be able to see that film earlier than the digital release. You know, if you paint a painting on oil, do you want to see the painting as an original, or do you want to see a copy of that painting as a print? You wouldn't go to an art gallery and expect to see a print of the Mona Lisa. You'd want to go there and see the original oil.
Well, the problem is what to preserve, what to restore. Non-fiction, which used to be just a nuisance as far as archives were concerned, is actually becoming one of the most interesting areas of film for conservation. And of course, the quantity of non-fiction is enormous, absolutely enormous. Every archive in the world has huge quantities of it. What to choose? It's a real challenge.
There's a tremendous amount of film that's never been catalogued, that's only made by independent filmmakers and not really well published or known.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to work on projects that covered the first works of major filmmakers, Charlie Chaplin, David Lean, and most recently Alfred Hitchcock. In fact, Hitchcock's first film as director, The Pleasure Garden. This had to be put together from 5 nitrate elements, and they're all prints. There's no camera negative still in existence, and we needed to go through them down to frame level, every shot, and then were there certain scenes where just a few frames could be inserted into a shot from different film copies. And you have to remember that each of those film copies, they're the same film, they're all The Pleasure Garden, but the images, the way they've been copied in history, will have a big result in determining how they look.
Shooting on film is still a better way now to preserve the content than it was a tape. So all the material that was shot during the 80s, you've kind of got this lost era of film, because all the film that was shot prior to then is still going to be here in 100 years' time.
Sound restoration is hugely important to us. There's an old joke that sound is half the picture, but it's incredible actually. When you examine a film soundtrack, and when we work on them, you hear them with and without picture, depending on the stage that you're working at. And filmmakers spent an incredible amount of time, even in what people think of as very standard mono soundtracks. They still spent an incredible amount of time designing those tracks and mixing them, and think of all those classic moments that you enjoy in sound cinema. How much of that is coming from what you're hearing, not what you're seeing. So we, for example, on a feature sound restoration, that's for us could be a solid 6 weeks of work.
This film I'm working on at the moment, a feature film, the client has asked for just a stabilisation pass and removing any major bits of dirt or frame damage. An example of the major dirt blemishes, which we're going to need to get rid of. Right, so here, on the cut, there's some damage either side. Looks like a joint that's been remade some years ago and been remade quite badly. So basically we just go in and attack it frame by frame by using the dust and fix filter. What it is you can use the surrounding frames before and after. So this is the end of a shot, so obviously I'm going to be using the frames before because the frames after don't exist. And just carefully just attacking the areas I need to. Let it mingle in. Make sure you haven't really created any nastiness. Fine. Sometimes I might need to go 2 frames back. Again, maybe go to a smaller brush as it's getting nearer to the guy running. I don't want to change his head movement too much. I'm not quite happy with the shading now. There's a hard edge. So what I do is I will change that again and go back through the shot until I can find a frame that matches in. That'll do.
One of the things that we're really lucky with is clients who work with film typically are all very passionate about what they do. It's very rare that we have clients that come to us that want to shoot on film that don't really care about their end product. So, the 4 feature film formats that exist and have existed now for a very long time, really Super 8, 16, 35 and 65. Anybody that's into photography that recognises that the larger the sensor size is, the more light you can get onto the sensor. You have a very different depth of field characteristics of a large format. So 65mm, as much as it has way in excess of 16K resolution, there isn't anything in the digital space that can compete to that sort of resolution practically.
As to what is the best, I think both. They work alongside each other, and I think 35mm and digital, and indeed 70mm, should all work alongside each other and should continue to work alongside each other. They both have great advantages.